So welcome back, and I hope you had time for a coffee. In this section, we're going to build out the integral map for organisations. We're using Ken Wilber's integral model, all quadrants, all levels. Now the integral model is based on these two axes, from the internal world to the external world, from the individual to the collective. That's us as a group. And we're going to start in the bottom left quadrant of the internal world of the collective. This is where we find culture, the way we do things around here, the unwritten rules, the unspoken norms. Now, culture is a bellwether for the health and vitality of our organisation. What's the culture like in your organisation? Do any of these words represent the culture that you find in your organisation? Is it supportive, collaborative, or is it more command and control, bureaucratic? Is it inspiring, innovative, or negative and siloed? Now, in the HBR article, culture is not the culprit. Jay Lorsch and Emily McTagg found that CEOs understood culture doesn't just appear here. Culture actually comes from the other three quadrants, the systems, the processes, the people. And what they understood was they needed to change those in order to change the culture. What that means to us is, don't start with a cultural change program. We need to start by looking at the other quadrants. So we'll start with the top two quadrants. This is the individual from the internal world. This is how we think. What are our values? What are our world views? And then we have the individual from the right, from the external world, which is what we say, the decisions we make and the actions we take. Now, there's been much research by people like Piaget, Torbert, Jacques, Keegan, Fisher, Cook-Reuter, Lovinger, Dawson, just to name a few. And what they have found out is through our lifetime, we develop through levels, given our potential and given that we've been given the right opportunity. Now, all of these levels have kind of fallen under this umbrella term of vertical development. And to explain what vertical development is, Nick Petrie, a leading consultant, uses the analogy of a glass. So we have this glass, and in it we fill it with knowledge and skills and expertise. But at the end of the day, we're still kind of constrained by the glass. Vertical development allows us to make the glass bigger. This allows us not only just to put more knowledge, skills and expertise in, but it also develops the way we think. It develops our ability to handle complexity. It develops multiple perspectives, multiple realities, greater worldviews as we build the glass bigger and bigger. So Bill Torbert, in his work in this area, he has come up with 7 leadership transformation levels. The first one is the opportunist. This is teenagers, young adults, and it's all about them and taking their opportunity. From there we grow into diplomats. Here we want to conform more to the norms, the standards, the rules, because we find that's safer and easier to get along. Once we move through diplomats, we move into experts, which is the first level we're going to plot on our integral map for organisations. Now, experts value knowledge, skills, expertise, but they don't make great managers. They want to tell their people what to do. It's their way or the highway. Have you ever worked for an expert manager? It's not great. From expert, we move into achievers. Achievers are now interested in strategic goals, achieving results. They actually make good first and second line managers in the right environment. They see themselves as initiators and not just a cog in the machine. They're starting to understand complexity and systems, but they have low self-awareness. From achiever, we move to redefining. In redefining, we can interweave the logics of people and organisation. We have an increased understanding of complexity, and we can operate in different roles and in different situations. And we have a greater level of self-awareness. From redefining, we move into transforming. Transformings look more for principles, contracts, for theory and judgment, not just rules and customers. They're process and goal orientated, and they have a range of world views. There is a level above that we won't plot, which is alchemist, and they have even further greater world views, and that's the position if you want someone to run a global organisation. Now, what Torbehr found in his research is that people fall into a distribution across these levels. At the expert level, we find 38% of the people. At the achiever level, it's 30%. At the redefining, it's 10%. At the transforming, it's 5%. At the alchemist, it's only 1% of people. The other thing that we need to understand with this is we can act at the level we're at, but we can't act at a vertical development level higher than us. So the expert can act like an expert, but they can't act like redefining or achiever levels. However, a person at, say, transforming level, they can act at that level, but they also can act at lower levels. So say there's a crisis, they can step in as the expert and tell people what to do. Or if an achiever's team needs some course correction, they can step in and operate at that level. Now, right now you might be wondering, what level am I? How big is my glass? Well, Nick Petrie again has developed an online assessment tool using the Washington Sentence Completion Test developed by Jay Lovinger and Suzanne Cook-Greuter. And if you're wondering, I've actually taken that test and here are my results. So what you can see here is I anchor around redefining, but I also operate as an achiever. And that makes sense to me because of my global line management career, operating in those roles. Redefining then is where I've been for probably the last 10 years, working at unicorn startups, where we're being disruptive to the market, we're redefining what we need to do and talking to people, to our customers, etc. And now transforming, where I can operate for some of the time at that level, is kind of what I'm doing now. We're trying to transform how organisations and people work so we can unlock change. So how does this influence our culture? Well, as I mentioned before, have you ever worked for an expert boss? It's kind of like things never seem to be good enough. Make this change, make that change. It actually becomes their work, not our work. What about a CEO who's inspirational, who's operating at transforming or even at alchemist? How great is it working for them? Or are they actually more worried about this quarter's results? And so now you're in meetings reviewing where you're up to, how you're tracking to deliver against the results. Those activities, they actually help drive the culture. Now, that's the internal world of the individual. Now, the external world is where we see people, what they do, the actions, etc. And that's exactly what Simon Sinek has picked up on with start with why. What Simon Sinek says is people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. It's very important to have the right purpose, mission, or objective that you can see on the internal side, because that sort of drives how you behave on the external side. And that's what our customers pick up on. Now, having a global mission statement is great, but it kind of falls into trouble when we try to cascade that down the organisation. This is where John Doerr comes in with his objectives and key results, OKRs. So what he believes in is that we've got to have that high level objective, but we need to cascade that down the levels of the organisation, the levels of the world, the vertical development, to more specific objectives as we go down. A great example is the Disney Corporation. At the Disney Corporation, their mission statement is to entertain, inform, inspire people around the globe through the power of unparalleled storytelling. Yeah, so let's play this out. I'm selling ice creams on the boardwalk at Disney World. Along comes a child, buys an ice cream. First thing they do is drop it. What do? I know. I want to entertain, inform. No, that's not going to help me make a decision. So at Disney World, what is their cascaded objective? What is their cascaded mission statements? Well, we all know it as happiest place on earth. So I've got a child crying, not very happy. What do? I immediately replace the ice cream, no questions asked, and off they go very happy, right? So we now have vertical development. We now need to have not just a mission, but cascading mission statements down here. And so we are ready to move into the bottom right quadrant, the external world of the collective. But before we do, you might be thinking or guessing in there that this has got something to do with the layers of the organisation. And that's exactly the work that Elliot Jacques did with his requisite organisation. Requisite meaning necessary. This is necessary in the organisation for it to be effective, for it to work properly. And what he has done with his actually 7 levels again is looked at that from the range of time that a person needs to make decisions. Because as you go from up to 3 months to 1 year, 2, 5, 10, etc., the complexity increases and the thinking that we need to do actually changes. So you can see as our glass is getting bigger, we think in different ways, we can think in more complex ways. And that's exactly what Jacques mapped out here. And then he mapped that to the layers of the organisation. So now when we go to the bottom right, the external collective, what we can map out is our organisation linked back to our vertical development levels as we go through that. So now this is kind of like what we'd like to see as our perfect organisation. And if we have all the right people in the right roles in this organisation, what does that do to our culture? Well, what we find going back to our culture here is in Don Beck and Chris Cowan's work, Spiral Dynamics, a company doesn't just have one culture. Cultures also have levels. And those levels can go from nomadic tribes to villages to towns to cities to global corporations. And what we can then plot that at the expert, and we've added diplomat here level, the individual contributors, there's one level of culture. And those cultures then change as we go up through the organisation. Is this what your company looks like? We now have the perfect organisation. We have the right people in the right role, making the right decisions, thinking the right way, and we've got this culture that's really developed out there. Maybe it's not quite like that. Well, Bill Joyner and Stephen Joseph, in their consulting work, used Bill Torbert's work to not just only measure people's vertical development, but also where did they sit in the layers of an organisation. And instead of finding what we have here, what they found is that at the junior and mid-level of managers, instead of really wanting achievers at that level, we had 43% were experts, 40% were achievers, and only 2.5% were redefining. At the executive level, we want redefining or above. Again, we found only 43% of them were actually still experts, and 39.5% was at the achiever level. We did have 14% at redefining or above. So we've made some progress, but we now have the wrong people in the wrong role. Why? Well, what we find when we have these functional alignments, right? What we find is we have groups of people, not teams. We have groups of people doing the same thing. Sales, service, support, marketing, development, etc., etc. And so what happens is we get budgets coming down those silos from the top. Instead of objectives and key results coming down, they get turned into KPIs. The top line objective goes out the window, right? And then what we do is we start skilling up our people around their functional silo, around the different areas that they operate in. And then finally, which is very key, we start promoting people based on their results, based on the results on their current role. Now at Yale, a research paper called Promotion and the Peter Principle by Alan Benson, Danielle Lee and Kelly Shue, they actually studied 214 companies across 53,000 people. And what they found is in the majority, we promote on current results. So we promote our best salesperson to be our sales manager. We promote our best developer to be the development manager. We promote the best service person to be the service manager, right? And what their research showed was that actually delivered the worst results. The best at your current role doesn't make the best manager. The skill they found that actually was an indicator of a better manager was if the person collaborated. So what we can see here is that again, we're looking for people who are broader, who have larger glasses, are further up the vertical development line because they're now moving into collaboration. They're now interweaving people and organisations, as we talked about before, going forward. The other thing we do is, because we have the wrong people in the wrong roles, how'd you like to be this achiever, reporting up to 2 levels of experts? Pretty soon they're going to learn, in order to survive, they better start behaving like an expert as well. The experts want all this data and they want to know what's going on, and they'll actually micromanage to a large degree. So if you're not across everything going on, then you're going to be in trouble. So you start to act like an expert. And what we're doing here is actually dumbing down our organisation. This is what consultants in this space are finding. When they go and measure what's your vertical development level, they're finding it comes out higher than what their actual activity level, how they're actually behaving. And so there's actually a gap between what they are able to achieve and how they actually operate. The other issue with this falls into what's called the prisoner's dilemma. So we now need collaboration across our different functional groups. And because budgets have come down from the top and KPIs are aligned to those groups, to get collaboration, quite often it's a zero-sum game. The zero-sum game is I'm going to have to give up something to actually help out one of my colleagues in a different functional group. That could be headcount, that could be budget, that could be changing priorities of what I'm working on to fit in with what they need. And that doesn't happen all that often. That leads to frustration, bureaucracy, etc. So we now have fundamental systemic issues going on inside our organisation. What does our culture look like now? So suddenly our culture is mirroring the behaviour we're seeing in the organisation, mirroring the behaviour we're seeing in the people, even if they are at higher vertical development levels. So we're now stuck. And this is why we're struggling so much in trying to unlock change. So let's just dive into this in a bit more detail. So here's our organisation with the wrong people in the wrong roles. So what could we do about this? Well, we could bring in consultants and we could do all this measurement around vertical development. We could start changing people. That is not going to work. Number one, highly disruptive. Number two, is that these other forces we just went through will slowly change it back to where we are today. So that's a no-goer. So let's separate where we want to get to from where we are today. So what we now do is a whole bunch of change programs. The first thing, we've read Simon Sinek's Start With Why, we've watched his TED Talk, so let's have a mission. So we have the mission at the top level, but as we talked about, that immediately gets lost as we go down each of the functional silos, right? So we now start putting in processes, but those processes are in the majority to actually fix up how we're not working together, how we're not collaborating. They're processes like resource requests. I fill in a form, I need some resources from another group, and I got to justify why they should come and work for me. What if I want to propose something to a client and I need pricing approval? I now tend to have to go to some sort of pricing committee to sort out product pricing, service pricing, delivery pricing, etc. Right? If you think about in your organization all the processes that you have in place, how many of those are actually just to get us to work across the groups, as in actually adding value to what we're trying to do? So then, okay, this is not working, so let's build out a RACI chart. Who's responsible? Who's accountable? Who needs to be a consultant? Who needs to be informed? And we spent hours, days, weeks on this, discussing, debating on, well, who do we tick? And we're not allowed to tick too many people in each step of the process or each operation that we need to do. Once we've completed this RACI chart, what happens to it? Well, it gets filed away, and really the only time it comes out is when we want to start pointing fingers at each other. Where did it break down? Who should have done what? Because we now got a problem on our hands. All right, so we're not working together well. Let's have overlay teams. Let's have someone overlaying the account management or the account executive. We'll have specialist teams to go and do that. Well, that is just adding more functional silos into the process. All right, that's not working. Let's have an inside sales team or business relationship managers. You see this in IT departments. I'm going to have a business relationship manager that talks to this group within our company, or this group or this group. So again, we've got people and processes and things happening which are not actually adding a lot of value. They're just trying to fix the problems that we've got. Compensation. We start to try and use compensation to fix the problems. We have global objectives. We have management business objectives. We'll do sort of incentives that if you work with this team, then you'll get extra money. In the sales area, it gets so complicated, so convoluted, but we're using this to try and fix up problems. We're not addressing the problems. And then finally, we're in meetings. We're in meetings on the hour, every hour for the rest of our lives. Well, that's kind of what it seems. We're in meetings, and even more meetings. So the only time we get to do work is when we go home at night or on the weekends. So we're stuck. And a lot of this is extrinsic measures, throwing money at people, putting in processes where you got to step through hoops, management, making sure you're doing things. This is extrinsic. And to do management that way takes a lot of energy and a lot of time. So how can we unlock this if those changes that we're trying to make don't work? Well, we actually need to fundamentally change our thinking. What Professor Edgar Schein said is there's not enough work going on between the interactions, the relationships between the people and the organisation. And what he said was after 60 years, we're still at the Darwinian stage. What is the fundamental thing we need to change? We need to change how we structure our organisation. Now, I know many of you will be thinking, oh, this is agile, this is lean, this is safe, this is those sorts of things. I'm taking it even further. The problem with some of the programs in that space is we might create a squad of people who work across those functional silos. But the issue is they still really report to the functional silos. They get paid out of the functional silos. It's coming out of their budgets. It's their KPIs. Yes, you might have an agile team leader managing that squad, but when the management pressure comes down, it's sort of they get pulled apart. We actually have to fundamentally change how we structure the organisation, where they report, and what are their goals. So the first thing is, when we do it this way, we can be aligned to our mission, to our nested mission statements. Happiest place on earth. We can make sure it's aligned to our customers, to our markets, to the outcomes we're trying to achieve. And that means that we're all we can make decisions based on those outcomes. It's not my budget versus your budget, my idea versus your idea. It's, if we do this, will it drive a better outcome? What that leads to is we now have return on investments linked directly to the market results. We now have closed feedback loops where we can see what are we doing, is it making a difference? This creates transparency and clear accountability. When you have these functional silos, you can point fingers and it's so hard to work out what's really going on. When you have teams focused, aligned, reporting to the market, to the customers, to the outcome, you know where the issues are. You know what's going on. And instead of blaming people, what you find is people step in and say, how can we help? How can we make decisions to improve this going forward? And it becomes naturally self-managed. It becomes what I just said. It's, hey, this is going wrong. What do we need to do? It's not like, this is going wrong. We need a meeting with such and such group and we're going to tell them what they're doing wrong and what they need to do to help us out. No, this is us as a team now working together to deliver the right outcome. And finally, we're going to promote people based on leadership, because the leaders of these teams need much broader skills than just the expertise of their function. And so we're going to find the people who collaborate. We're going to find the people who can actually lead teams, and they're the ones who will get promoted. And naturally that will fall in line with the vertical development levels as people grow and develop. So let's now put our realigned organisation back into the integral map for organisations. And what we can see around the quadrants is that we now have alignment between the vertical development of our people. We're at the right levels into the organisations, at the right layers of the organisation. And this now, out of this emerges a vitality and a health that we want in our culture. Now, I hear you say, well, that's great, Rob. That's great, because all you've done is drawn a simple organisation chart which doesn't reflect reality. And what happens when we try to map this out across the whole organisation? Well, how does that work? Well, welcome to Chapter 2, Implementing the Integral Map for Organisations. And we'll go through how you take this realignment and you apply it to small, medium, and even large-scale organisations going forward. I hope this has been useful. I hope that we can continue the conversation, because, as someone once said, if we don't change directions, we'll end up where we're heading. Thank you.